An old man stands alone on the top of a mountain. The wind pulls at his robe. His eyes are still sharp, we are told, not dimmed by age. And from where he stands, he can see everything. Green valleys, a river winding like a silver thread far below. Groves of date palms shimmering in the heat. A land flowing, the promise said, with milk and honey. He has walked 40 years to reach this spot. 40 years of sand. 40 years of burying friends in the desert. 40 years of leading a people who complained and rebelled and built a golden calf and begged to go back to slavery because at least in Egypt there had been food they recognized. 40 years of holding a nation together with nothing but a staff, a tent, and the voice of God. And now he is here. He can see the land, he can almost smell it. And God tells him he will not be allowed to set one foot inside it. Remember this man. We are going to come back to this mountain, because what happens next, centuries after he dies, will change the way you read this entire story. But not yet. Here's what you need to know first. That number, 40 years, is not an accident. It is not a round figure someone picked because it sounded old and important, because the moment you start looking, you find it everywhere. 40 days of rain, 40 days on a mountain, 40 days facing a giant, 40 days walking to meet God, 40 days in a desert with the devil himself, over and over and over. The same number. In flood, in fire, in famine, in temptation, across thousands of years and dozens of different lives. And this is the part nobody tells you. It is never random. Every single time that number appears, it is marking the exact same thing. A pattern so consistent that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And most people read right past it their entire lives. So let me be clear about what this is. This is not a story about a number. This is not a story about math. This is not a story about some hidden Bible code you need a secret decoder to crack. This is a story about what God does to a person in the space between the life they had and the life he is building. It is a story about deserts, and it is a story about you, because the odds are good that you are standing in one of these seasons right now, and you do not even know what it is for. Let's go back to the beginning, to the rain. Picture the world before the water came. Noah has been building for a long time. His neighbors have watched him hammer together a boat the size of a small mountain, on dry ground, miles from any sea. They have laughed, they have called him mad. And then, one morning, the sky does something it has never done before. It rains. Not a storm, not a hard afternoon shower that clears by evening. The book of Genesis says the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, 40 days of a sky that would not close, 40 days inside a wooden box that smelled of animals and pitch, in a darkness so total that Noah could not have told you if it was noon or midnight. No stars, no sun, no horizon, just the endless drumming of water on the roof over his head, and below it, the groan of the timbers and the sound of the animals shifting in the black, and the slow, terrible knowledge that everything he had ever known outside those walls was gone. His neighbors, his city, the world he grew up in, all of it under the water now. That is the first thing you have to understand about this number. In Hebrew, 40 is arba'im. It comes from the root arba, which simply means four, the number of the physical world, 4 directions, 4 corners, 4 seasons. 40 is 4 made complete. It is a full turning of the earthly world. And when the world needs to be washed clean and started over, God does it in 40. The old world dies in 40 days of rain, and a new one is born. Hold on to that because it is about to happen again. But this time, not with water, with fire and cloud and the voice of God on a mountain. Moses climbs Sinai and disappears into the smoke. The people at the bottom watch him vanish into a cloud that flashes with lightning, and they wait. 1 day, 2 days, a week. And Moses does not come down, because up there, in a place no one else is allowed, God is speaking. Exodus tells us Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights, 40 days without bread, 40 days without water. Just a man and the living God, close enough that when Moses finally came down, his face was still glowing, and the people were afraid to look at him. Do you see it starting to form? Noah went into 40 days of darkness and came out into a clean world. Moses went into 40 days of cloud and came out carrying the law of God in his arms. The number is not marking time, it is marking transformation. Something goes in, and something completely different comes out. But the pattern has a shadow side, and the people at the bottom of that mountain are about to learn it the hard way. Because a generation later, that same nation stands at the edge of the promised land. It is right there. All they have to do is walk in. So Moses sends 12 men to scout it out, and they are gone. You can guess the number, 40 days. 40 days walking the land, tasting the fruit, seeing the giants. And when they come back, 10 of the 12 are terrified. They tell the people it cannot be done. The giants are too big. We are like grasshoppers, they say. We felt like insects next to them. And the nation believes the fear instead of God. So God gives them a sentence, and it is one of the most haunting lines in the whole Bible. Numbers, chapter 14. For each of the 40 days you scouted the land, you will wander 1 year, a day for a year. 40 days of fear turned into 40 years of desert. There is a word for that desert. In Hebrew, it is midbar. And here is what almost no one notices. Midbar shares its root with the word davar, which means a word, a voice, a thing spoken. The wilderness and the voice of God come from the same root, as if the desert were designed from the very beginning to be the one place empty enough that you could finally hear him. That is what 40 is, not a punishment clock ticking down, a stripping away of everything else until only the voice is left. And no one in Scripture learned that lesson more painfully or more famously than the man we are about to meet. But before we go on, let me say one quick thing. If you are still watching this far in, you are the kind of person who actually wants to understand your Bible, not just skim it. So do me a small favor. Subscribe and leave one word in the comments. The name of the desert you're walking through right now. Grief, waiting, silence, debt. Whatever your 40 is. Just one word. I read them, and there is something powerful about seeing how many of us are in the wilderness at the same time. Because we are only halfway through this pattern. So far you have seen 40 wash a world clean, 40 forge a leader in the clouds, and 40 become the price of a nation's fear. But the next 3 times this number appears, the stakes climb higher than a single family, higher than one man on a mountain. We are talking about an entire army frozen in place, a prophet who begged to die, and a whole city 40 days from being wiped off the map. Stay with me. It gets stranger from here. For 40 days, an entire army does nothing. They are the armies of Israel, and they are camped on a hillside across a valley from the Philistines. And every morning, a giant walks out into that valley. His name is Goliath. The book of 1 Samuel is careful to tell us he came forward morning and evening for 40 days, and every time he shouted the same thing across the ravine. Send me a man, send me one man to fight me. And every morning, the soldiers of Israel looked at that mountain of a man, and their courage drained out through the soles of their feet, and no one moved. 40 days of being taunted, 40 days of a nation's God being mocked at sunrise and sunset, 40 days of paralysis. You know this one. On the 41st day, a shepherd boy who was only there to bring bread to his brothers hears the giant, and something in him refuses to accept it. And with a sling and a stone in the name of the Lord, David ends in about 10 seconds what an army could not face for 40 days. But look at what 40 did there. It was not empty time. It was the exact length of testing it took to prove that not one grown soldier had the faith, so that when the rescue finally came, no one could pretend it came from human strength. 40 days emptied the field of every human option, and then God sent a boy. That is the shape of it, and it happens again with a prophet who was so tired he asked God to end his life. His name is Elijah. He has just won the greatest victory of his life, called down fire from heaven in front of the whole nation. And then a queen threatens him, and something inside him breaks. He runs into the desert, sits down under a lone tree, and prays to die. He is done. And instead of scolding him, God feeds him. An angel bakes him bread. And on the strength of that food, 1 Kings tells us, Elijah walked 40 days and 40 nights to a mountain called Horeb. Stop and hear that. Horeb is another name for Sinai, the same mountain. Elijah walks 40 days to stand in the exact spot where Moses stood in the cloud. And there, God does not come in the wind or the earthquake or the fire. God comes in a sound the old translations call a still, small voice, a whisper. Remember the desert word, midbar, the wilderness that shares a root with the voice of God. Here it is, made real. A broken man walks 40 days into the wilderness, and at the end of it, he does not get a lecture. He gets a whisper. The 40 was never the punishment. The 40 was the walk it took to get quiet enough to hear. There is a Hebrew word for what God is doing in all of these 40s. It is nasah. It means to test, but not the way a teacher tests to fail you. It means to test the way you test gold in fire, to prove what is real and burn off what is not. Deuteronomy says it plainly. God led them 40 years in the wilderness to humble them and to nasah them, to prove them, to see what was truly in their hearts. 40 is God's refining fire, set to a timer. And here's where it gets remarkable, because the early church saw this pattern too. Augustine, writing more than 300 years after Christ, noticed that 40 is 4 times 10. 4, he said, is the number of the world, the 4 winds, the 4 corners, and 10 is the number of the law, the 10 commandments. So 40, to Augustine, was the whole of human life lived under the law of God, the entire span of our striving before we enter our rest. That is why, to this day, the season of Lent is 40 days long. The church built a 40-day desert into its own calendar on purpose, every single year, because it understood something we keep forgetting. We are not supposed to skip the wilderness, which brings us to a city that had exactly 40 days to decide whether it would live or die. The prophet Jonah, after his own detour in the belly of a great fish, finally walks into Nineveh, the great enemy city, and preaches the shortest, bluntest sermon in the entire Bible. Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. That is it. 8 words. 40 days. A countdown to destruction, shouted through the streets of a city that had every reason to kill him for saying it. But watch what that 40 actually was. It was not a sentence already carried out. It was a window. It was mercy wearing the mask of a deadline. Because God did not have to warn them at all, and the fact that he gave them 40 days meant the 40 days were a gift. Time to turn. Time to come back. And unbelievably, the whole city did. From the king on his throne down to the animals in the field, they repented, and the destruction never came. The deadline that looked like a death sentence turned out to be the doorway to their rescue. Do you feel the pattern tightening now? Flood, mountain, wilderness, giant, prophet, city. Every 40 is a fuse. But the fuse is not always burning toward destruction. Sometimes it is burning toward a brand new beginning, and you cannot tell which from inside it. There is only one more 40 left, and it is the one the whole Bible was building toward. Jesus walks into the desert alone. He has just been baptized. The heavens have just torn open, and a voice has just called him beloved Son. And the very next thing the Spirit does, the very next thing, is drive him out into the wilderness, into the midbar, for 40 days. 40 days without food. 40 days in the same barren country where Israel wandered, where Elijah walked, where the voice of God waits in the silence. And at the end of it, when he is at his very weakest, the tempter comes. And here's the thing you cannot miss. Every temptation the devil throws at him is the exact temptation Israel failed in their 40 years. Israel craved bread and grumbled against God. So the devil says, "Turn these stones to bread." Israel tested God at the waters, demanding he prove himself. So the devil says, "Throw yourself down from the temple and make God catch you." Israel bowed down to other gods and worshipped a golden calf. So the devil offers him all the kingdoms of the world, if he will just bow down once. Point for point, Jesus is walking back through the old wilderness, and where the whole nation fell, he stands. Where their 40 ended in a graveyard of an entire generation, his 40 ends in victory. The desert that broke everyone else could not break him. And now we can go back to the mountain, to the old man we left standing at the very beginning of all this, staring at a promised land he was told he could never enter. His name was Moses. And you may have felt the injustice of it this whole time. 40 years he led those people. 40 years of their complaints and their idols and their rebellion. And his reward was to climb a mountain called Nebo, see the land from a distance, and die there, on the wrong side of the river. He never set foot in the promise. The book of Deuteronomy says God himself buried him, and to this day no one knows the grave. That is where his story ends. Or so it seems. But turn the pages forward, more than 1,000 years forward, to another mountain. Jesus climbs it with 3 of his disciples, and there, his face begins to shine like the sun, the very way Moses' face once shone coming down from Sinai. And 2 men appear beside him, alive, talking with him. One of them is Elijah, the prophet of the 40-day walk, and the other is Moses. Do you understand what you are seeing? Moses is standing in the promised land. He is inside it. The man who was told he would never enter is standing on a mountaintop in the very country he was denied, fully alive, speaking face to face with the Son of God. God kept the promise. He just kept it on the other side of death, bigger than Moses ever asked, later than Moses ever wanted, and more glorious than any patch of ground with milk and honey ever could have been. So let me tell you what 40 is not. 40 is not a punishment. 40 is not God losing your file and forgetting where he put you. 40 is not the end of the story just because it is the hardest chapter of it. Here is what 40 actually is. And I want you to think about the most ordinary, most human number you know. A child is not carried for a random amount of time. From the first spark of life to the first cry, it is roughly 40 weeks. 40 weeks in the dark. 40 weeks unseen, unable to do a single thing, growing in a place with no light and no way out. And no one looks at a pregnancy and calls those 40 weeks a punishment. You do not tell an expecting mother she is being delayed. She is not being delayed, she is being prepared. Something is being formed in the dark that could not be formed any other way. That is your 40. The flood was not the end of the world. It was the forming of a new one. The wilderness was not God abandoning Israel. It was God teaching a nation of slaves how to be free. The desert did not destroy Jesus. It revealed him. Every 40 in this book is a womb. It looks like a grave from the inside, but God has never once used it to bury you. He uses it to build you. So what do you do with all of this? Let me leave you with 3 things. The first is simple. Wherever you find 40 in the Bible, you are looking at a season of testing with an expiration date built into it. God never starts a 40 without already knowing where it ends. The flood had a shore. The wilderness had a border. The temptation had a 40th day. Your season has an ending too, and it was set before it ever began. The second is closer to home. If 40 always has an end, then the desert you are standing in is not permanent. It feels permanent. From the inside, day after day, it always does. But every 40 in this book was a corridor, not a room. It had a door on the far side. And you are further along that corridor than you can possibly see from where you're standing right now. And the third, this is the one I really want you to carry out of here. You are not being punished in your 40. You are being formed in it. The same God who sent Noah into the dark and brought him out to a clean world, who walked Elijah into the silence so he could finally hear a whisper, who let his own son grow hungry in the desert before the whole world ever knew his name. That same God has not forgotten you and yours. He is doing in you the one thing that can only be done in the dark. He is building the person who walks out the other side. So here's my question for you, and I really do want your answer. What day of your 40 are you on? Not the number, see. You will never know the number. I mean, does it feel like day 2 when the walls first close in? Or day 39 when you can almost feel the ground about to change under your feet? Tell me in the comments. Let's stand in the wilderness together for a minute, because none of us walks it as alone as we think. The rain stopped. The mountain cleared. The giant fell. The city was spared. The stone rolled away. Every 40 ends. Yours will too.